your solo host. Yeah, we've got a really good show though tonight and a lot to cover because, in all honesty, the amount of news that happens even over the weekend is just it's astronomical. And we need to bring it to you because staying on top of what's going on allows us as people who want to shape the future of our country and our state and even our state's cities, some of whom have truly gotten off the wrong track. uh, we need to be informed in order to be the ones who can inform others. So let me share with you a lot of news, and let me first say that I think we've entered a new phase here of the political battle. Some of it seems like Groundhog Day. Once again, somebody's threatening to indict President Trump on phony charges, garbage. It happens to land for some crazy reason in the same week that tons of news is breaking about the Biden family and Hunter Biden and the Department of Justice and the FBI. It's all landing at the same time. What's interesting is President Trump doesn't know until the last minute when they're going to plan to do something like uh, indict him, but the Biden administration knows when they are going to encounter these confrontations from the House Republicans or from the media or from Judicial Watch or just simply news headlines that they cannot prevent from breaking. So I'm declaring today a Let's Go Brandon Monday, thus the hat, and let's delve right into it. So one of the big pieces of news here is that the Biden DOJ is sort of being forced into the idea of letting the Delaware prosecutor that was in charge of the probe into Hunter Biden testify to the um, in front of the House committee that is Judiciary Committee, which is headed by Jim Jordan. It's the same day that congressional investigators secured a formal date that they will then be able to host Hunter Biden's close former business partner, Devon Archer, to testify, which will be next Monday, a week from today, the 31st. And the House Oversight Committee is going to conduct a transcribed interview in that case. The Department of Justice said it wanted Weiss, who is the prosecutor from Delaware, to testify so he could address allegations from two IRS whistleblowers, which has now been corroborated by an FBI whistleblower, that he did not have the authority to indict Hunter Biden on felony tax charges dating to 2014, and that there was political interference in the probe before the first son, Hunter Biden, struck a plea deal on two misdemeanor tax charges, virtual slaps on the wrist with no time expected in jail whatsoever. The department believes it is strongly in the public interest for the American people, for Congress to hear directly from U.S. Attorney Weiss on these assertions and questions about his authority at a public hearing, the letter to Jim Jordan said. So they're going to make him available. I think he's being forced to do this at this point because so much has come out that is destroying his credibility and, frankly, at this point, undermining the credibility of the plea deal that was struck with Hunter Biden, which has to be approved by a judge. And as I understand it, that approval will come up in just a few days, a couple of days, one way or the other. So I don't know what's going to happen. I know that they didn't want Weiss to come and speak before that happened, but that is what's going to happen. And I think that increasingly the consequences are becoming apparent that Joe Biden was present for these phone calls. There are Devon Archer apparently is going to be able to corroborate that information, according to a couple of the chairs that are looking into this amongst the House Republicans and the House of Representatives. Now, while making a concession on Weiss, the department signaled it may not let other Department of Justice officials, including Weiss's deputy Leslie Wolf, testify or turn over all the documents sought by Jordan's team. The letter said the department was deeply concerned by your notification today that the committee has authorized deposition subpoenas for the individuals identified in your letter. Any attempts at compulsory process are unjustified and premature, it said. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's Department of Justice speak for saying, oh, Shisa, you are going to call someone like Leslie Wolf, who literally stated that they would get in trouble if they looked into the very credible allegations that Joe Biden was aware of and engaged and even present during some of these discussions that involved receiving all this money from China, Ukraine, and elsewhere. I think that remember what they used to say about Trump during the Trump-Russia investigation, the walls are closing in? Well, I don't have to say that because they are on Biden, and it's going to get worse. And all they're trying to do now is drag it out. I got to listen to a journal editorial report that was very interesting, and they said that there was something noteworthy because I did not get to watch all the testimony last week. They said it was noteworthy that the Democrats who in the hearing like to make speeches decrying Trump and talking about this and that and blah blah blah, but they would not ask any questions directly of the IRS whistleblowers, who are very competent, capable, career individuals, career civil servants, and they just didn't want to take the chance of actually asking a question they might get the answer to or corroborating the story accidentally. So they basically asked them nothing and just made a bunch of pontificating speeches attacking Trump. This is big news. They are getting closer. I believe they're going to find enough information by talking to some of these business associates and by forcing some of these document disclosures that there's going to be an issue for the Department of Justice and for Hunter and Joe Biden. Will it change what happens with the plea deal? I don't know. In a way, I don't really care. If I look at it, I think that this is going to be enough for impeachment proceedings. And that's interesting to note because there are two prominent Republican congressmen that say the move to impeach Biden is gaining momentum. Congressman Greg Steube and Ralph Norman, so Florida and South Carolina respectively, say that we're actually working on our own impeachment resolution for President Biden on all this corruption, all the laws and crimes that he violated. And once they initiate an impeachment inquiry, it becomes much more difficult for anybody in any corner of the executive branch to withhold information or testimony from an impeachment inquiry. We saw that last time when they were compelling information and testimony when they were trying to impeach President Trump. Of course, that led to nothing. However, in this case, I think a lot of damage is going to be done to Joe Biden because Joe Biden is, at this point, he's kind of a vegetable. He just walks around, falls asleep during state visits of foreign dignitaries, and he doesn't know what he's doing and what he's saying. And I'll get to more of that in a minute. But there's going to be impeachments, and it's not just Joe Biden. I think actually they mention here that Speaker Kevin McCarthy seems to be open to the idea of impeaching U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland. Now, that might also be another reason why they're sending U.S. Attorney Weiss to go and testify to the House Judiciary Committee. That might be to save, if they think they can do it, Merrick Garland's bacon. It's probably going to be a lot of, I can't answer this, I can't answer that. pontification and generalization. I don't think that, but does Weiss want to have a future doing anything? Maybe not. He might be willing to be the fall guy and take all the hits, or maybe he's going to blame somebody they won't let testify, like that assistant prosecuting attorney Wolf, and then try to stall for time. But Merrick Garland said some things that do not comport with the facts that we know them as we know them now, and made claims that he'll have to answer for. But getting this guy from Delaware to testify is a step in that direction. So Stubbe said that Garland is the top law enforcement officer in our country, and he's using his power and position to defend and deflect for the president and the president's family. It's completely against the law. So, top law enforcement officer taking actions that appear to be completely against the law. Good reason to impeach somebody, just about any day of the week and twice on Sunday. So, let me just go ahead and post that article here, because I think it's worth taking a look at this and sharing it with people. But right now, what we're seeing is they're essentially lighting up the fires on these inquiries in earnest. I want to see them go faster. I think they can go faster, but I also think that by being methodical, they are actually starting to tear away at the remaining credibility that the Department of Justice and the FBI has, and of course Biden himself. Now, the House Oversight Chair Comer says he expects Hunter Biden to face between 6 and 10 criminal referrals. These are going to be charges referred to the Department of Justice by the House Republicans. And what's going to happen, of course, is under current leadership, the DOJ is not going to do anything with them, or they're going to launch something and try to make it take a really long time. But they're going to be able to put the lie to the fact that the Democrats keep saying that we don't have any evidence. Comer said, Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene showed them evidence that was on display in the committee, and the Democrats went absolutely ballistic. They lost their minds because he was actually she showed them evidence of the president's son committing a criminal act, violating what's known as the Mann Act. She showed plane tickets. She showed pictures. She showed the evidence. There's no question he violated it. It's another thing he could have been charged with. And of course, there's the Foreign Agents Registration Act, in which he, instead of registering as a foreign agent, he engaged in money laundering, racketeering, wire fraud, violated the Mann Act. The list is going to go on and on and on. And I think this is going to be telling, because there isn't a lot of leeway for somebody like Merrick Garland, who might be facing impeachment, to be able to avoid accountability for enforcing the law. I think his ability to navigate that, unless he wants to sacrifice himself. But let me remind you something about Merrick Garland. This is a guy who, to this day, Democrats say should be on the U.S. Supreme Court, that Republicans, Mitch McConnell in particular, said, we're not going to even have a hearing for this guy. And I think that was based on another set of principles and a time-honored reality that if you have a president of the opposite party of those who are controlling Congress, that Supreme Court justices are not confirmed in presidential election years. And that it turned out it was true. However, I think we might have narrowly avoided having an extremely corrupt person from getting onto the Supreme Court for a lifetime appointment. Instead, we ended up getting some justices that have done things like simply stood by the law. And I think this is worth mentioning here in a moment, just how important that's turned out to be, because it's a more serious issue than just what I described. There are law professors that are saying some things about what Biden should do with regard to the Supreme Court because he doesn't like their rulings. But let me come back quickly to a couple of other developments. So apparently, Merrick Garland and the DOJ are being sued for not requiring Hunter Biden to register as a foreign agent. This story broke um, sometime last week, and it's true that when you can demonstrate that an entity that could have forced him to register as a foreign agent didn't do that, then now this lawsuit has been filed. That's going to be further revelations, more information gathering. And as more and more of this information is being corroborated by people who worked with Hunter Biden, I think we're gonna find that there's just Merrick Garland's gonna have no place to run. He can hide, but he's going to be facing impeachment proceedings, and it's going to start dominating the news cycle because impeachment proceedings, no matter what the media tries to say, is going to have a lot of juicy stuff come out, and it's going to be put in front of the attention of the electorate. I think this is good. This is good news that we're actually exposing all of this. But America First, a conservative group, has filed this lawsuit, and they said that Garland had an obligation to enforce President Joe Biden's son to register with the agency while he was sitting on the board of the Ukrainian energy firm Burisma Holdings Limited. And it goes into some detail about also how CEFC America, which was a Chinese oil entity, also that should have required him to register as a foreign agent. And don't forget, the DOJ and the deep state prosecuted and put people in jail that they claimed had done this, such as Paul Manafort. And this system of justice or injustice that has come to occur could be also put on trial in such a lawsuit. So anyway, continue to follow that one. I think that we are looking at a sea change in this entire set of cases. There's another very interesting piece of information which I think is worth looking at. Right now, there are law professors around the country who are urging Joe Biden to defy the Supreme Court so-called MAGA rulings. And this report names names of different professors who are saying that these are just illegitimate decisions of the Supreme Court. Jonathan Turley, a Democrat liberal law professor who's just honest and actually still believes in the law, he spoke out on this and said this is extremely concerning and detrimental to the rule of law, because then that just means Joe Biden is a government unto himself. It's true that that would essentially mean that Joe Biden gets to decide that he is the Supreme Court. And even though these battles can happen between different branches of the federal government, this is essentially law professors saying that our system of law doesn't matter. It's a system of authoritarian rule. And it's the definition of authoritarian rule is what Jonathan Turley said. So we need to be ready to call this out, because it is going to continue to occur. You're going to see this more and more. They want to pack the court, which they failed to do. And now, of course, they want to cancel the court. And of course, they didn't want to protect the members of the court who were being threatened with violence when last year after the Dobbs decision. So I guess they want them to die. I don't know. I mean, how can you construe that if Merrick Garland and Joe Biden don't see any reason to actually protect and defend Supreme Court justices from direct violent attacks and threats of violence? So we've jumped the shark here politically, because now we've got a complete breakdown and we've got somebody who doesn't know what he's doing in charge. But this isn't just Republicans that are saying this. Candidate for the Democratic nomination, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is calling for a corruption investigation of Joe Biden. He says that the release of the FBI informant memo last week has escalated his concerns. And don't forget, he's the son of actually the former Attorney General, uh, Robert Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, during the John F. Kennedy and OBJ administrations in the 60s. So he's not somebody who doesn't pay any attention to these issues and has no understanding of what's happening. But he said, I've avoided criticizing the president because I'm trying to bring people together and end some of the vitriol, the poison that's made politics so poisonous. But I think some issues are now coming up, are worrying enough that you need a real investigation of what happened. I mean, these revelations where you have Burisma, which is a notoriously corrupt company that paid out apparently $10 million to Hunter and his dad. If that's true, then that is really troubling. He said, I think that's something every American needs to worry about, that our federal agencies, which used to be above politics, have now become weaponized as political instruments. And then again, and that again is another really damaging trend in our democracy. So there's one Democrat who's actually concerned with it. So at least we have one. Maybe we'll have others soon. Speaking of politicization of our once trusted institutions of law enforcement, the Secret Service, the White House cocaine investigation. Well, that one turns out to be pretty interesting because a former supervisory special agent in the Secret Service has come forward saying that he's surprised the agency is closing the investigation because they say they didn't figure out who it was, in one of the most secure buildings on the planet. And they have not identified a single suspect. They haven't even identified a group of possible suspects. They just simply say, we're done. Charles Martino is his name. And he said, if you tell them go out and get to the end of something, that's exactly what they're going to do. You've got a designated time frame. You've got the holiday in which this occurred. We're fairly certain that the item did not linger for a long period of time on the West Wing based on the security measures we know are in place in terms of checking that area and conducting sweeps. So why is this being treated as if it's a dime bag or 8 ball of cocaine that was found on a street corner in a major city? Why isn't it being treated that this was found in the White House? Also, if you didn't think it was a threat or could be a threat, why was the hazmat team called? These are great questions. And he's saying basically somebody's stopping this from being thoroughly investigated. So even if stuff from 2014 and 2016 were investigations that were diverted or hijacked or blocked into Hunter Biden and stuff that could lead to Joe Biden, the lesson hasn't been learned yet. They're still doing it today, and they're even doing it with an entity whose job it is to make sure that the White House is secure. Not to mention the fact that that's also the entity in charge of making sure President Trump is secure and safe as a former president. Speaking of that, President Trump is lambasting Biden on foreign affairs. Remember, by the way, in 2020, no debate was conducted on foreign affairs. That was the third debate that was canceled because Joe Biden refused to attend. And Trump said, we have a man that doesn't understand what he's doing. He said, Biden has told China and these other places that are hostile that we have no ammunition. And we've covered that here in the captive audience. He literally went and just said, why are we sending cluster bombs to Ukraine? Because we're running low on 155 millimeter shells. Yeah, if anybody in the military had actually come out and said that publicly, that would be treason. Is it treason when the president of the United States says it? I don't know, but maybe it's grounds for impeachment. It sounds to me like a high crime or misdemeanor to come out and start saying things that would increase the chance that your adversaries may actually launch aggressive war. And so I think of China in Southeast Asia because they know we're running low on ammunition. Also, by the way, what has Joe Biden done to invoke, say, the Defense Production Act or some emergency measures to make sure we start producing as much ammunition as possible? I don't believe I've noticed him doing that. If anybody has come across that, I'd love to see it. And so Trump said Biden's comments are worse than any classified document that could have been given to the enemy. Think of it. How stupid can somebody be to say that? Great point. So Joe Biden's become a severe national security threat. Some people are starting to wise up to this, that used to dismiss this stuff and make excuses for Joe Biden, claiming, "Hey, Joe Biden, he's back. He's in the White House now. The adults are back in charge." Yeah, a man baby, a drooling infant, but not somebody who actually seems to be capable of making decisions or to even speak carefully in situations that could um, advantage our adversaries and lead to wars. And by the way, I think the number one job of the president is to prevent wars. And I don't see how Joe Biden's done that or is doing it. He certainly didn't prevent the Ukraine war. And there was every opportunity to do so. And now it's 100 pounds of cure. So, meanwhile, Vice President Giggles, Kamala Harris, she's in charge of, she's taking on the issue of fentanyl, the fentanyl epidemic, emphasizing that just 2 milligrams of fentanyl is enough to kill someone. The only thing is she doesn't seem to mention the number two, the two most important features of why there's so much of this stuff and how it's getting to people in cities in the United States. And it's that China is the major supplier of the chemicals and the precursors needed to produce it. And the US-Mexico border is the primary port of entry. That's where it's coming from. She just talks about how we recognize that we have a public health crisis. Well, actually, it's a foreign launched public health crisis. What is she going to do about it? And she doesn't seem to be prepared to address the fact that 107,000 people in the US died of drug overdoses and drug poisonings in the 12-month period ending in January 2022. So that's over a year ago. It's worse now. It said 67% of those deaths involve synthetic opioids like fentanyl. But nowhere in her remarks does she mention anywhere the two policies that seem to be allowing this drug to cost, in the case of fentanyl laced pills, $1. It's super cheap, super plentiful, and it's overwhelming our cities and it's killing people. So what action is she taking? Nothing. Remember, she's the border czar. She's done a great job with that. They sent her to Poland to talk tough prior to the Ukraine war invasion. And she claimed that they had Vladimir Putin deterred. If you want the harbinger, the signal that things are going to hell in a handbasket, as Vice President Harris starts talking about it. That's how you know. And so even Chuck Schumer said that China's practice of exporting the precursor chemicals is done with the total acceptance and acquiescence of its government. So he's admitting that the Chinese government is the top direct supplier of this stuff and that they're being sent to Mexico. They're not denying it. They're just pretending like they don't have to do anything about it. If people's deaths can be attributable to someone, then it's to these people who apparently have little to say about doing something about it. Now, there's a lot of other problems that are being caused by how they've coddled the Chinese Communist Party and opened the southern border. But that one's a no-brainer. And they're running around like chickens with their head cut off, talking about how bad fentanyl is that they've allowed into the country, and yet they take no steps to solve it. Well, here's something that should also be concerning, that under the Biden administration, there's now been revealed a confidential Pentagon memo that says that transgender soldiers can defer being deployed while on hormone therapy. So hormone therapy, paid for courtesy of the Pentagon and the U.S. military, those hormone transition therapies allow them to waive physical fitness standards, and that they are permitted to delay deployment such that up to between 9 and 18 months to complete their gender transition to whatever they're transitioning to, so they can stabilize as their new gender. And the memo actually admits that hormone therapy comes with potential health risks and undesired side effects, which, by the way, you never hear anyone talk about uh, within um, within the military or within the Biden administration or the leftist lamestream media. They just don't even talk about it. But this they say this is to provide a safe and effective pathway to achieve lasting personal comfort with their gendered selves and to maximize their overall health and promote psychological well-being and self-fulfillment. I don't remember that being the point of the military, any of those things. Their job is to go kill people and break things to protect our country and its citizens from potential death. And yet they've got a military memo that's literally prioritizing over the need to deploy people, uh, the personal comfort of people's newly gendered selves. They talk here about Alan Hopewell, a neuropsychologist in Fort Worth, Texas, who served in the military for 28 years. He comments on this memo saying this illustrates the serious issues surrounding transgender soldiers. He says, I've been doing this for 50 years. The kind of person who would dress up in a dress and do all this stuff is mentally unstable. This is what he said. And he actually is a neuropsychologist who served in the military. This is what he said. He said the military has yet to address the medication issue. He believes the 300-day moratorium on deploying soldiers confused about gender will just be the beginning of the problems. He said combining mental instability with hormones under combat stress could be dangerous to the transgender soldier and other troops they're serving with. Transgender soldiers taking hormones are more likely to suffer from mood swings, health problems, and making them a higher mission risk when deployed. High doses of hormones have contributed to erratic behavior exhibited by some gender dysphoric people, he said. And Army medics aren't equipped to deal with the issues in the field. Now, I think all of us remember and know that there were a whole list of medical conditions, some of which were not debilitating, but just were presented too much of a risk of somebody who couldn't actually function or be relied upon in combat, that made it so that people would not be drafted or would not be able to volunteer to serve in the military. That's existed for decades. Now we're saying that the military is actually going to pay for someone to do this, and then they're going to let them sit around and do nothing so they can eventually end up in combat with circumstances and situations that Army medics aren't prepared to handle and could endanger fellow troops. To me, this sounds like really a ticking time bomb for our military. If people want to go do this, go gender transition, do it on their own time where they're not serving in the military and they haven't sworn an oath to protect the country, because that should be their number one job. By the way, there's been he said, Hopewell says he doesn't believe allowing transgender soldiers to serve in the military is a good investment for the military because he doesn't think they will last long. A significant Danish transgender suicide mortality study published in the Journal of American Medical Association. The Journal of American Medical Association. So not some crazy fringe publication. It was published on June 27th, just a few weeks ago, showed that transgender individuals had, quote, significantly higher rates of suicide attempts, suicide mortality, suicide unrelated mortality, and all-cause mortality compared with non-transgender population. And yet it was the U.S. Army that changed its rules in 2021 to allow gender dysphoria, confusion, and distress over biological sex individuals to serve. So this is what our military is doing. The top people in charge of it are apparently refusing to stand up to the president and make clear that this is something that is endangering our soldiers in combat, the people who are transgender themselves, the other people serving in combat. It's going to cause unrecoverable problems at times in combat for medics who can't handle the circumstances that could be brought on by it. And frankly, if their job is to protect the country in crucial military missions, that's not going to happen either when this is a situation that plagues our military. So go ahead and read this article. But it's a confidential memo. So that just says something. Why is it that we're finding this out through confidential memos over the course of 2 years after a decision's been made? Well, speaking of confidential memos, apparently someone in China screwed up. I'm pretty sure they're heading off to join the Uyghurs in hard labor and torture right now because somebody in China in the government published official COVID data indicating over 1 million more deaths than have been reported um, by the Chinese government due to COVID. The data that was published confirmed that China's latest COVID wave likely killed between 1 million and 1.5 million people. Prior to that, Beijing was claiming that only 83,700 people had died in China since the start of the pandemic. It was the provincial government in Zhejiang, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and the government deleted the data last week just after it was published. But epidemiologists who reviewed the information said it was the latest indication that Chinese official death toll is vastly undercounted, which makes perfect sense. Provincial data shows that the number of cremations rose to 171,000 in the first quarter of 2023, which is 72,000 more than the cremations the same period last year when they had the stringent COVID mandates still in place. So, experts say that Zhejiang, which has a population of 65.8 million people, when extrapolated to China's population of 1.4 billion, is consistent with earlier mortality estimates. And so this is where they're sort of projecting this onto the larger Chinese population. It seems like Joe Biden has nothing to say about this, yet the country whose origin and design of the virus is almost certain to be the case now is actually lying about its own figures. Seems to enjoy way too high level of trust from the Biden administration, and certainly no criticism. We're still in danger as long as this is the case. The country of China is simply too irresponsible for us to entrust them with any level of confidence as to how they are integrating with the world and treating various serious topics like this. Well, shifting to the home front, there's been some interesting developments in California, and I want to bring it to your attention right now. So California, like Oregon, enjoys some of the lowest math test scores in the country. And yet, California is advancing a framework of equity and social justice that they say is going to remake math and change math standards in a state where they spend over $20,000 per K through 12 student, placing it among the top states per pupil spending in the United States. Its students rank 30th in math in the country. I believe Oregon's actually worse. But they've decided that the really important thing is to produce equitable math outcomes. An assets-based approach is what they call it. So watch for this, Orwellian BS doublespeak from the Democrats. It's going to come hot and heavy, and we're going to start hearing these terms, and people are going to say, "What does assets-based approach to instruction mean?" And active student engagement through investigation and connection. It's garbage. They say they're going to have instruction that centers on cultural and personal relevance rather than maybe doing math right. And they say the 5 important components is plan teaching around big ideas. Well, you know what those big ideas are going to be. Yeah, we already know the short list. Use open, engaging tasks. Now, I don't have a problem with that, except I don't really know what they really mean by that. It could be shaming people for white supremacy and saying this is how we're going to learn math. I don't know. Teach towards social justice. And the minute you hear that, that means they're not going to teach towards math. And invite student questions and conjecture. Well, they should already be doing that, except that if they don't teach them something in the first place, what are they going to ask questions about? And then lastly, and this is number 5 in the list, which means it's number 500 million, not 5, is prioritize reasoning and justification. Of course, I suppose they can rationalize anything to say 1 and 1 is 3. That doesn't make it right or true. So this is what they're going to do. They say that this is going to help shift students' perspective on mathematics, as well as their sense of belonging as mathematics thinkers. So it's about feelings. Even though the last I checked, math doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't. So if you don't feel good about math, math doesn't become more to your liking and more amenable. It's still 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 3 is 5. And if you don't feel good about that, it's not going to change. And they say they're going to achieve equity by reducing expectations for what students will learn by the time they graduate from high school. That is Orwellian leftist progressive code speak for we're going to lower standards and we're going to make it so that no one feels any pressure to learn anything. They actually plan to wait until the 9th grade to let anyone take Algebra 1, which means that it's almost impossible to complete calculus by the time they graduate high school. There's a lot of schools that you apply to for college that are simply not going to be interested in you for most of the things they teach, not to mention any math, science, STEM disciplines. They're just not going to do it. But they say it's going to eliminate inequalities by making everybody terrible. And, but it only ends up reinforcing them, I think, by dancing around the fact that it doesn't want to acknowledge if they want to diversify math related fields like getting girls and students of color to take calculus in high school, they should have more of them take those things, not fewer. So this is all garbage. It's all feel good, terrible stuff. And I think the people it's going to hurt the most by far are women and minorities who actually should be offered the opportunity to proceed with the type of learning to get into a STEM profession if they want. So woke math is definitely not the answer, says Republican State Senator Scott Wilk of Santa Clarita. He serves on the California Senate Education Committee. I think the only thing these schools are going to be good for is indoctrination of progressive leftist stuff, where they teach towards social justice and they teach away from things that actually allow you to be able to function in either an academic or work environment. I don't know how, if you want woke math to be applied to, say, the change you receive when you buy something at the store, or the car loan documentation, you want woke math, well, then that means that's not math. That's wokeness. One cancels out the other, and that's what you're going to get. And as a GOP Assemblyman Bill Essile of Woodcrest says, the problem is not race or the curriculum. It's the low-performing public schools. They're failing. They want to tinker with everything else other than deal with the actual issue at hand. Well said, Bill. This is something horrifying, and yet they're going full steam ahead. You know that's Oregon's plan too, with everything. And they're going to call it racist if you disagree. Well, back here on the home front, we had a big story that came out last week, and I'm going to give you an update on it. So there was a gentleman, Jesse Lee Calhoun, had his sentence commuted in 2021 by then Governor Kate Brown. It was done with no review by the district attorney, who has these names submitted to him to provide input back to the governor, who can choose to not listen to it. But apparently, in this gentleman's case, he just didn't do it at all. And so this was further brought to light over the weekend in an Oregonian article. It said that Mike Schmidt didn't review the commutation request for the Oregon man, now linked to the deaths of 4 women. And these are heartbreaking cases. I mean, Ashley Real, I don't have an easy link to it, but if you go watch the video of her father talking, and she was, by the way, assaulted once earlier by him, apparently. They had to wait at the hospital. He had to wait at the hospital for hours to help get her treated. And Then one day she just didn't come home, and was found, I believe, a couple months later, May 7th, some ditch someplace. And this guy, back in November of 2022, had done enough that the uh, law enforcement authorities knew that he had violated the terms of his clemency and should have had it revoked and sent back to jail. And he didn't. And now she's dead, along with 3 others. So, but Mike Schmidt, the Schmidt Show, as we all know, in Multnomah County, the location of Portland, just simply did not review it. He says, given the limited information in the short timeline, we did not have a meaningful opportunity to respond. And so they did not. But Kevin Barton, the much tougher on crime, authentic district attorney in Washington County, he received more cases to review, and he reviewed them all and recommended against all but 2 of them being given clemency and sent that back to the governor. So Mike Schmidt just didn't give a crap. And his spokes idiot, Liz Mira, who used to be a reporter, I think for, I believe it was either Willamette Week or OPB or something along those lines, she came out and made this statement saying they just didn't bother. And now people are dead. I really do wish that the district attorney could be sued out of existence personally for failing to do this. But as you know, there's no real way to compel someone to do that. But here's what Mike Schmidt's opponent, because Mike Schmidt's running for re-election next year in May, and his opponent, who's a longtime Multnomah County prosecutor from his own office, has declared to run against him for that position. His name's Nathan Vasquez. Says he's going to raise this issue during the campaign. He's going to make this an issue and run on it. And so a request was made, by the way, by the Oregonian for an interview with Mike Schmidt, and they weren't able to get any attention for that. However, ever the person to mouth off and say complete evil stuff is Eliza Kaplan, Lewis and Clark Law School professor, who Kate Brown said, influenced her thinking on criminal justice, and said she believes commuting Calhoun's sentence played, quote, no role in the deaths now linked to Calhoun. Even without a commutation, Kaplan said, he would have been out of prison by the time Smith turned up last December. Well, his sentence was originally shortened because of, quote, good behavior, unquote. Good behavior in custody. Plus, I guess he was one of the people that did some of the firefighting in 2020. So they cut him some slack. But here's what Kaplan said. I don't see how the commutation could lead to this, or that governor's decision to commute him has anything to do with the case. Attention should be on law enforcement. It should be on figuring out who committed these crimes. So Kaplan is also casting doubt on whether or not this guy actually committed these crimes. You know what? I bet that she's also looking for the person who actually killed Nicole Brown Simpson. She's probably the kind of lawyer that OJ would love to have, for any future cases he might face. This is the thing. She issued more than 1,000 commutations. They used the excuse of COVID-19, and that excuse was used over and over in order to, frankly, empty the jails and the streets. And they did it. And they put dangerous people out there. Now we have proof that that's what happened. Now, a lawyer who worked with Representative Kevin Mannix in Salem, Monique Despain, said that the unsuccessful legal challenge of Brown's clemency powers shows that Calhoun's early release underscores the pitfalls of granting clemency to groups of prisoners. Each case, she said, deserves careful review, as we just proved, because of the DA in Multnomah County simply not even bothering to do that for just a few dozen releases that were submitted to him. There was no careful review done. She went on to say now that with 2020 hindsight, we can see that this guy didn't do enough jail time. He was not rehabilitated. Before you release somebody from prison, you should know that person's history. Excellent points. I recommend everybody take the time to read this article because it lays out what was very predictable about what occurred, because not only was the system broken and not done with care and concern, but it turns out that 11 of the 41 inmate firefighters, the ones who went and fought the fires, whose sentences got commuted, have subsequently been picked up on felony charges. That's 1 in 4. 1 in 4 of these firefighters have been picked up on subsequent felony charges. That's according to this article in the Willamette Week. You should take a look at this too, because what's interesting about this is now people are calling upon Tina Kotek to go back and review all of the commutations, because commutations can be revoked. Pardons are a different story, but Lori Chavez Dreamer and Cliff Bentz, representatives, Republican members of Congress from the 5th and 2nd districts, respectively, say in a letter to Tina Kotek, we urge you to review every single conditional commutation granted by Governor Brown to ensure no one is a victim of the former governor's reckless leniency. And so the pressure is growing on Tina Kotek, because Tina Kotek actually has to live with the political consequences if she does not take action. She simply can't just, when she has the power to do something about it, do nothing. Because as this continues to occur, this is a campaign ad that writes itself. And of course, again, I mentioned that Ashley Reel was one of 4 women now suspected Calhoun was suspected of killing, that filed a domestic violence complaint against him in November of 2022, which should have been enough to trigger him being sent back to jail and his commutation being revoked. Who didn't do it? Tina Kotek. But did anybody else in the chain along the way go back to her and say, this is what needs to be done? I don't think we should ask Eliza Kaplan, who's still confused about whether or not there's any connection between these murders and Calhoun. But here's what the state's Criminal Justice Commission said. 51% of convicts on post-prison supervision in Oregon are arrested within 3 years. They're arrested within 3 years. 35% of them are convicted of a crime. The recidivism rate, they say, has been dropping in recent years, but pretty consistent with the rest of the country. But this just means that half the people that are being released on post-prison supervision, they're going to be arrested again. And just a little over a third of them are going to be convicted. So you know that every time you release a mass number of people, this is what's going to happen. That's why you don't release a mass number of people. You review every single case. And you don't do it with a lax system and a DA that just doesn't give a crap. So, clemencies, the recidivism rate is found to be about 18%. Those commutations differ from later clemencies that were for crimes not against persons. So there's a difference there. But I think we need to start pointing out how this is a real thing. And that it needs to be acted upon and not just dismissed. Senator Tim Knopp, the Republican leader in the Oregon State Senate, came right out and said that the deaths of the 4 women who were found in Oregon, that this is that Brown is to blame if the person of interest in the deaths is found guilty. She's to blame, and she deserves to be assigned that blame. Now, you might say, well, she's out of office and not running again. But as this article recounts, there was a trail of different issues that should have led to him being put back in jail. And now we have to say that legal changes are needed. Certainly, there needs to be reform of the commutation system. There should be a vote of at least the state Senate on every commutation that takes place so that they have the chance to concur or not concur with that. And as I mentioned, Laurie Chavez, Dreamer, and Cliff Bentz have said, in light of recent events, we write with deep concerns for Oregon's safety. It's no secret that the Portland area has been experiencing severe and dangerous crime crisis in recent years. 2021 and 2022 were the deadliest years in Portland's history, with both years soaring past the previous homicide record set in 87. So in the middle of a crime crisis, it is time to take action. So that's a lot of good information to share with you. We're going to continue to keep you up to date on this, because this is where politicians and radical leftist activists, who frankly I think are evil when they support things like this, like Eliza Kaplan, they need to be held accountable. And we have to use this as an opportunity to alter this system so that we can safeguard the public against the politicians who want to virtue signal to leftists and let deadly criminals back out on the street and do nothing about them once they're out there. This is a lot to cover today, but we covered it. Thank you for staying on here with us today, and I hope you've gotten your Let's Go Brandon update, but also what's happening back here on the home front in Oregon. We got a lot to do. We've got to let a lot of people know what is happening at some level of detail, and we really have to start fighting the good fight in a way that we expect to win. Anyway, thank you all for watching here today. Thanks for staying along on my solo flight for this evening. We will definitely have some good guests coming on for you in the coming weeks. I'm talking to people all the time, and I promise you we will also have more good shows for you this week. I should be back tomorrow with David Darnell for another episode of The Captive Audience, and a ton of news and developments, I'm sure. Thanks, everyone.